In this film, a predator must hunt a very dangerous monster to prove his strength and escape the death penalty. Then in the midst of his struggle, the predator discovers an android robot that might be able to aid his hunt, and the film begins. The film begins with a planet called Yautja Prime, inhabited by a predator clan called the Yautja. Afterward, the predator Dek fights his brother Quay as a test. Despite his best efforts, Dek fails to defeat Quay. Quay believes Dek lost because he fought while overcome by his anger. Time passed until finally Dek and Quay were chatting on the plane. It turned out that Dek had lost one of his fangs while trying to save Quay. Soon after, Dek prepared to carry out the Yautja hunting tradition so that he could prove his strength and worthiness to become a member of the clan, and this tradition required the hunter to bring home his prey. Dek then set the aircraft's destination so that it could fly automatically to Genna, a planet inhabited by an indestructible monster named Kalisk. Dek recklessly chose Kalisk as his hunting target because he was ready to risk his life to prove himself. Moments later, Dek and Quay welcomed their father Jor, who was now the leader of the Yautja clan. Jor then discussed the Yautja rule that weak clan members must be executed, and unexpectedly, Dek was declared a weak member because his body was relatively small for a predator. Jor also refused to give Dek a chance to prove himself because he was sure his son would fail in carrying out the hunting tradition. Jor eventually orders Quay to execute Dek, but in the process, Quay betrays him and uses all his might to save Dek. Thanks to Quay's help, Dek finally manages to escape on his plane and head to Genna. Meanwhile, Quay is executed by Jor for defying his orders. As he approaches the planet Genna, Dek's aircraft is slowly damaged by atmospheric pressure, and for his safety, Dek is forced to make an emergency landing without his aircraft. Once the time is right, Dek is determined to defeat Kalisk to honor Quay's sacrifice. And as he begins his hunt for Kalisk, he is attacked by a plant-like monster. He fights desperately to defeat the monster, but ultimately flees because it is too difficult to defeat. When continuing his hunt, Dek entered an area of thorny plants, and soon a monster we'll call Dragon used the plants to prey on Dek. In the same location, a woman named Thea was trapped in a monster's lair. Thea then activated her translator feature so she could communicate in Yautja. From there, Thea told Dek that the plant's thorns contained a poison that could paralyze movement. Thea was then able to deduce that Dragon wanted to paralyze Dek with the thorns. As Dragon aggressively attacked, Dek fled trying to avoid the thorns. Unfortunately, Dek was trapped and eventually hit by the thorns, making it difficult for him to move. Before losing consciousness, Dek threw his weapon to Thea. Thea freed herself and killed Dragon just as the monster was about to devour Dek. Afterward, Dek's condition slowly recovered, thanks to the antidote Thea gave him. As they began to talk, Thea admitted she was a Wayland Yutani android tasked with researching Genna. With her experience, Thea could confirm that Genna's environment was extremely lethal to humans. Thea also stated that she had witnessed several predators hunting Kalisk. However, none of them survived, and it was possible that Dek would suffer the same fate. In her current condition, having lost her leg, Thea offers Dek a deal. Thea will reveal the location of Kalisk on the condition that Dek helps her get her leg back first. Dek refuses because members of the Yautja clan have a principle of hunting alone. However, Dek is eventually forced to agree to the deal because his prey tracking device is broken. After that, Dek started carrying Thea to the robot's destination, and he used a special tool so that Thea was always attached to his back. Along the way, Thea shared her extensive knowledge regarding the various creatures that inhabit Genna. Entering the break, Thea told that she had been in Genna for the past 2 years. Together with her team, which also included an android robot, Thea built a base for a research mission. Then one day, a team member named Tisa invited Thea to explore the realm of Genna so that Thea would not feel bored working in the laboratory. From there, Thea and Tisa were attacked by Kalisk until they were finally separated. And the same attack also caused Thea to lose one of her legs. The next day, Dek and Thea continued their journey, and soon they encountered a monster named Bull. After Thea informed him that Bull was Kalisk's prey, Dek was determined to hunt the same monster for food. However, Dek postponed his hunt when he discovered that the area Bull was occupying was filled with sharp grass, and it turned out that Bull's body was resistant to the grass. Due to the actions of a small monster that approached Deck, Bull finally fled. Deck then used the surrounding trees so he could chase Bull without entering the sharp grass area. Then in this situation, the small monster, which we will call Bud, returned to bother Deck. It was as if Bud wanted Deck to fail in hunting Bull. While fighting Bud, Deck is forced to divert his attention due to the approaching Bull, and in this moment Deck manages to kill the Bull with his Yautja laser-powered sword. Shortly afterward, Deck and Thea are attacked by another monster called the Nightmare, and thanks to Bud's help, they both manage to escape. Afterwards, Nightmare turned to hunting Bud, and this situation finally gave Deck an opportunity, so he finally managed to kill Nightmare. Deck then shared the meat of the monster he had hunted with Thea, but Thea refused considering she was a robot who didn't need food. On the other hand, Bud also accepted the meat given by Deck, and uniquely, Bud spat at Deck as a sign that he now considered Deck as his family. However, unfortunately, Deck didn't want to become emotionally attached to Bud. Meanwhile, Thea's teammate Tessa managed to escape and is undergoing a recovery process. Apparently, every android robot in Thea's team is connected to the Weyland-Yutani network, and thanks to that network, Tessa can detect the presence of Yautja members in Gena, in this case, Deck, and currently Tessa's system considers Deck a threat to her mission. Once her condition has recovered, Tessa begins to search for Thea, and in the process, Tessa and her team manage to eradicate the monsters without any significant difficulty thanks to their sophisticated weapons. Tessa then found Deck's plane crashed in Gena, and upon entering the plane, Tessa accidentally discovered a bomb capable of freezing a target's body. Sometime later, Deck and Thea finally arrived at their destination, which turned out to be Thea's team's facility, and at that moment the place was severely damaged by Kalisk's attack. Not long after Thea managed to find her severed leg, and she immediately used the medical facilities that were still operational to reattach it to her body. While waiting for the recovery process, Deck asked Thea to keep her promise to tell him the location of Kalisk, and there Deck was surprised because Thea had secretly called her team. While her team had not arrived, Thea urged Deck to leave immediately, and the reason was that Thea already knew her team would kill Deck because the Yautja were considered a threat to their mission. It turned out that all this time, Weyland-Yutani had also assigned Thea's team to capture Kalisk, so from now on, Deck had to compete with Thea's team. Deck finally left Thea feeling betrayed because Thea broke her promise to reveal Kalisk's location. While still near the base, Deck used flammable materials to create a huge explosion, and through this action, Deck successfully lured Kalisk to the location. Deck then fought desperately to kill Kalisk, and due to the effects of their fierce battle, Thea's leg recovery process was hampered. Thea then used the weapon left by her team to fight Kalisk, and thanks to Thea's help, Deck was able to perform a series of actions until he finally managed to behead Kalisk. However, Kalisk was able to recover quickly because it had super regeneration abilities. Kalisk then managed to corner Deck and prepared to eat him, but Kalisk finally let Deck live because he smelled Bud's scent on Deck's body. A few minutes later, Tessa arrived with a freeze bomb she stole from Deck's ship, and thanks to the Yautja bomb, Tessa managed to capture both Kalisk and Deck. As time went by, Deck woke up being held captive by Tessa, and it turned out that Tessa had been the leader of the android robot operation to capture Kalisk. Tessa then stated that Deck was now Weyland-Yutani's property, just like Kalisk, who was locked up elsewhere. After that, Tessa reactivated Thea, who had also been detained, and then informed her that he would soon send Kalisk to Weyland-Yutani to be used as a research subject. Tessa also assessed that Kalisk's super regenerative abilities could be used as a breakthrough in the medical world. In addition, Tessa also thanked Thea for creating an opening that allowed her to capture Kalisk and Deck. Tessa then conducted painful experiments on Deck to investigate the predator's abnormal body size. Thea finally stopped the experiment to protect Deck, and as a result of this incident, Tessa then ordered her subordinates to lock Thea up and kill her for treason. Then as soon as Tessa left, Thea followed Deck's instructions to trick the android robot that was watching them. As a result, the android robot was killed by Deck's weapon, which was actually a Yautja children's toy. While there was a chance, Thea rebelled, and she managed to help Deck escape alive. Deck then jumped into a waterfall to escape Tessa's team's pursuit. After that, Deck managed to find his plane and used medicine at the location to heal his wounds. Deck then searched the plane for weapons because the weapons he had been using had been taken by Tisa. Unfortunately, Deck found nothing because the weapons on the plane had also been taken by Tisa. Deck finally took a mask, which was the only valuable item left behind by Quay. Once he had recovered, Deck began searching for living creatures in Gena that he could use as weapons. Deck then chose sharp grass as a short-range weapon and a creature that spits acid as a long-range weapon. After returning to the facility where Thea was recovering her leg, Deck accidentally found Bud, and from there Deck discovered evidence that Bud was actually Kalisk's son, who had been captured by Tessa. Shortly thereafter, Deck freed Thea's trapped leg, and it turned out that Thea's leg was now functioning normally, so Deck used Thea's leg to track her location. Time continued to tick away until Thea's feet led Deck to the Weyland-Yutani headquarters in Gena, where Thea was being held. Deck then used a spray of acid to kill one of the androids, and afterward Deck managed to kill several more thanks to Thea's feet's diversionary tactics. While splitting up, Deck, Bud, and Thea's leg managed to kill a number of android robots in their own ways. After eliminating the guard android robots, Thea's leg managed to free Thea and reunite with her. It turned out that Deck saved Thea to repay her kindness. When he met Thea, Deck told her that Kalisk was Bud's parent. Deck then determined to save Kalisk so that Kalisk could live again with her child, and afterward Thea emphasized that they had to move faster because Kalisk would soon be removed from the base to be sent to Weyland-Yutani. Following Deck's strategy, Thea struggles to free Kalisk, but in the process, Thea fails to unlock Kalisk's cage because her status as a member of Team Tisa has been revoked. With Bud's help, Thea manages to kill the android that was about to capture her, and afterward, Thea takes over the android's eyes to unlock the cage, which is based on retinal scanning. At the same time, Deck, with his combination attacks, manages to kill many of the androids surrounding him. Shortly after, Deck confronted Tessa, who was operating a destruction robot, and Tessa used the robot as a weapon against Deck. Meanwhile, Deck had now turned to making Tessa a trophy, or prey in the Yautja hunting tradition. While Deck was still fighting, Kalisk finally appeared and immediately attacked Tessa for revenge. Deck and Kalisk then worked together so that Tessa's robot was heavily damaged by their combined attacks. In the midst of her cornered condition, Tessa was about to kill Kalisk with her stolen Yautja laser weapon, but before she could do so, Tessa was eaten first by Kalisk. When the situation was safe, Deck gave Kalisk a warm touch as a sign that he wanted to make peace with the monster. However, not long after, Kalisk suddenly felt a disturbance before his body was shattered into pieces. It turned out that the condition was triggered by Tisa, who could still attack while trapped inside Kalisk's body. Tessa then prepared to kill Thea with a Yautja laser weapon, but due to Deck's attack from behind, Tessa failed and ended up paralyzed Bud, then removed Tessa's head to permanently kill her. Sometime later, Deck returned to Yautja Prime with his repaired aircraft, and afterward he met Jor while being watched by many Yautja clan members. Deck finally confirmed that he had completed his hunt, handing over Tisa's head as a trophy, and as a reward for his success, Deck asked for a valuable Yautja device that could make the user's body invisible. However, Jor refused to acknowledge Deck's success because Jor considered Deck and Quay as traitors to the clan. Jor then ordered 2 of his soldiers to execute Deck, but Deck managed to kill them easily because he had become stronger since leaving Yautja Prime. Jor finally fought Deck so he could execute his own son, and in the climax of the battle, Deck managed to defeat Jor and remove his father's clan leader mask. From here, Jor finally recognized Deck's strength and allowed him to join the clan, but Deck refused as he already had a clan that accepted him for who he was. Shortly after, a fully grown Bud finally appeared and devoured Jor's head. Deck didn't oppose Bud's actions as he wanted to avenge his father's crimes. It turns out that Bud and Thea are now members of Deck's clan, and at the end of this moment, Deck takes over the invisible power from Jor's hand, which he had cut off. Within minutes, the clan members prepare to attack Deck to punish him for his actions, and even more seriously, Deck must also face his mother, who arrives in a large plane. And the film finally ends.